Lawmakers in the Israeli Knesset voted overwhelmingly yesterday to approve two bills that essentially halt the operation of the UN Relief and Works Agency, that's UNRWA, within areas under Israeli control. Now, this comes after more and more evidence has shown how the Hamas terrorist group has infiltrated the UN agency. In fact, we've seen where the supplies intended for civilians have ended up in the hands of terrorists. Well, earlier today, the legislation was discussed at the UN meeting in New York City. And among those who expressed deep concerns about the legislation was the U.S. representative to the United Nations, Ambassador Linda Thomas-Greenfield, who made clear the Israeli humanitarian aid efforts fall short of the current administration's expectations. Now, will these latest developments further strain the relationship between the U.S. and our closest ally in the Middle East? Joining me now to discuss this and more, U.S. Senator John Cornyn of Texas, who serves on three committees, including the Select Committee on Intelligence. He's a part of the Senate leadership team as well. Senator Cornyn, welcome back to Washington Watch.
Great to be with you, Tony.
Let me ask you your reaction to the Israeli Knesset's move to sever ties with UNRWA.
Well, I know the Biden administration says that they stand with Israel, but it seems like at almost every turn they seem to want to undermine Israel's ability to defend itself against an existential threat, and that is from the number one state sponsor of terrorism, Iran, and its proxies like Hamas. So I believe they have a right to defend themselves, and if that means excluding UNRWA from Israeli-controlled territories because they're infiltrated by Hamas, I think they have a right to do so, and think that's the right call.
If the Biden-Harris administration is concerned, and I think everyone's concerned about innocent civilians, making sure they get humanitarian relief, UNRWA has a very, very checkered past. I mean, going all the way back to George W. Bush, there were questions raised about the connections with Hamas, terrorist organizations. The United States actually has its own humanitarian arm called USAID. If the Biden-Harris administration is so concerned about humanitarian relief and they support Israel, why not temporarily use USAID as the source, since we've given UNRWA over $1 billion?
Well, the United States believes in providing humanitarian support, whether it's directly, like you said, through USAID or through UNRWA, if that's possible, and the aid will actually get to its intended target or beneficiary. But as you pointed out, it's been infiltrated by Hamas, and a lot of the aid that's been sent to the Palestinians that are collateral damage to this conflict is being diverted to support these terrorists. Look, Hamas doesn't care about the Palestinian population. If they did, they wouldn't use them as human shields. They wouldn't build tunnels underneath the Gaza's surface there, where they manufacture missiles and other weapons of war. So this is not there's no moral equivalency here between Israel and Hamas and Iran. If Israel put down its arms today, Hamas would not. If Hamas were to put down its arms today, there would be peace. And that's the way I see it.
Yeah. Senator, I agree. And Israel has made that offer many, many times. But there are obviously those who refuse to even acknowledge Israel's right to exist. I want to shift gears a little bit to domestic issues. We're in the middle of an election. I think you're very much aware of that. Texas has been a target. We had the vice president there in Houston on Friday campaigning on her number one policy of abortion. I want to talk about the media's approach to this, the legacy media and beyond. But MSNBC covered the rally that Trump had at Madison Square Garden on Sunday. And I want to play a clip of Jonathan Capehart in his comments regarding that rally. Play clip number 11.
That jamboree happening right now, you see it there on your screen, in that place is particularly chilling because in 1939, more than 20,000 supporters of a different fascist leader, Adolf Hitler, packed the garden for a so-called pro-America rally.
What does that type of rhetoric do to our nation and to our politics?
Well, that kind of propaganda, that disinformation effort by MSNBC is something that Vladimir Putin would be very proud of. And actually, rather than bringing Americans together, that sort of rhetoric divides us further. And after this election's over, Tony, no matter what happens, Americans, Texans are all going to have to come together because we need each other in order to be successful. These are very important issues, and increasingly it seems like the Democratic Party has become the party of extremism. You mentioned the issue of abortion. This used to be a conversation that could be had between people in good faith, but now Democrats see no reason for any restriction whatsoever on abortion rights up to and including the time the baby is actually born. That is a radical position that's shared by very, very few people in our country. But this is all they've got, is attacking President Trump. They know they lose when they're talking about the direction of the country. The country is clearly on the wrong direction, according to public opinion polls. And since Kamala Harris was a vice president during President Biden's administration and can't think of anything she would change, this is all they've got, is to attack President Trump, and they do it relentlessly.
Speaking of having conversations, the Senate often describes as the saucer of the teacup, where it cools off, it moves slow, methodical. Also, one of the top issues that Vice President Kamala Harris has said she would be for, at least as it pertains to abortion again, would be eliminating the filibuster, the longstanding rule in the Senate that that moves the body toward consensus as opposed to forcing a majority view on the rest of the country. What are you concerned about the future of the Senate under Democratic control?
I certainly am, and this is part of their radical agenda. They want to get their nose under the tent, so to speak, on the issue of abortion, but they also want to make the District of Columbia and the Virgin Islands, Puerto Rico, states, which would elect 2 Democratic senators each. They want to pack the Supreme Court because it won't bend to their will on so many issues that they care about, and this is their way to do that. And so we must stop them. It's just, it forces us to do something that maybe doesn't come naturally, and that is to try to find that consensus and common ground. It's hard enough to do already, but if you have strictly a majority vote, then you look at the prospect of every 2 years, depending on how the election turns out, having policies from taxes to regulation to abortion flip back and forth every 2 years. So this provides a measure of stability that served us well in this nation for our entire existence. And it's another indication of just how radical Democrats have become.
And of course, that's decided by the control of the United States Senate, separate from the presidential election. And Senator Cornyn, I would add to that, instability is how we're viewed internationally as well, where our allies can't count on us because we're back and forth like a ping pong match, election cycle after election cycle. Senator, I want to thank you for joining us. Always great to see you. Thanks so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Tony.